All India Radio, Chennai. In tonight's program of English, we would be featuring a literary talk on the poem of Alfred Tennyson, Home They Brought a Warrior Dead. The whole poem is written in third person, with the narrator describing a particular incident of a recently widowed woman's reaction to her husband's death in battle. The literary talk would be presented by Professor Vidya.
Listeners of All India Radio, a very good evening. Happy to share a poem of Tennyson, Home They Brought Her Warrior Dead, and a quick review of it in this wonderful evening. Do you all remember the moments when India stood stupefied on the attacks of violence in which many gave their lives for the sake of the country? The soldiers posted into a war zone wake up each day not knowing if that day would be their last. Their families suffer day in and day out and hoping that their beloved ones are safe. Our Jawans who live in extreme weather conditions strive hard to guard the nation. Nowadays, we more frequently hear soldiers sacrificing their lives, orphaning their dear and near. We remember them at times of crisis and salute them once in a year on Martyrs' Day. But do we ever know at what and whose cost he does such a supreme sacrifice? The poem, Home They Brought Her Warrior Dead, would definitely make you all understand about it. My choice of reviewing this particular poem relies on the fact that it is high time for us to focus on the impact of the war on the families of the soldiers. Let me read the poem. Home they brought her warrior dead. She nor swooned nor uttered cry. All her maidens watching said, she must weep or she will die. Then they praised him soft and low, called him worthy to be loved, truest friend and noblest foe, yet she neither spoke nor moved. Stole a nurse from her place, lightly to the warrior stepped, took the face cloth from the face, yet she neither moved nor wept. Rose a nurse of 90 years, set his child upon her knee, like summer tempest came her tears. Sweet my child, I live for thee. What a beautiful poem. Before analyzing the poem, shall we look at a short biography of the poet? Yes, Alfred Lord Tennyson, the most renowned poet of the Victorian era, was born in 1809 as a son of a church rector. Tennyson and his siblings were raised with a love for books and writing, because of which Tennyson penned his first poem at the age of 8. It was at 1827 when Tennyson joined Trinity College. He met Arthur Hallam, his close friend who later married his sister. In 1829, he won the Chancellor's Gold Medal for the poem Timbuktu. In 1830, Tennyson published his first solo collection, Poems Chiefly Lyrical. Being unable to complete his degree due to unforeseen family circumstances, Tennyson determined to focus on poetry. As a poet, he faced many struggles. His poem, The Lady of Shalott, received many unfavorable reviews, so he avoided publishing his poems for about a decade, though he continued to write many poems. Later, he published a revised version of the same along with the poems Locksley Hall, Morte d'Arthur, and Ulysses in the 2-volume Poems in 1842. This work was positively reviewed. The Princess and the In Memoriam are some of Tennyson's notable works. The elegiac creation, which contains the famous lines, "It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all," incorporated Tennyson's sorrow about his friend Arthur Hallam's death. It greatly impressed readers and won Tennyson many admirers. A long beard, a cloak, and a broad-brimmed hat made his fans easily spot him anywhere. In June 1850, Queen Victoria selected Tennyson to succeed William Wordsworth as England's new poet laureate. The Queen, who grieved her husband Prince Albert's death, found a great comfort in reading the poem In Memoriam. An episode in the Crimean War led to Tennyson to write The Charge of the Light Brigade. In 1854, the work was also included in Maud and the Other Poems. In 1864, Enoch Arden and Other Poems sold 17,000 copies on its first day of publication. Though Tennyson ventured poetic dramas like Queen Mary, they could not match the impact of his poems. The poet suffered from gout and experienced a recurrence that grew worse in the later summer of 1892. Late in that year, on October 6th, at the age of 83, Tennyson passed away at his home in Surrey. He was buried in Westminster Abbey's Poets' Corner. Let us now analyze the poem. The poem Home They Brought Her Warrior Dead by Tennyson can be considered as one of the war poems written during the period in which pessimism and anti-war mood was apparent. This poem tells the story of a woman who lost her husband in a battle. The father of the family was killed at the war, leaving behind a widow and an infant. His family, neighbors, and friends all flocked to his house and cried for his death. But unexpectedly, his wife did not cry and kept stoic. Till the last moment, his wife was solid, but suddenly she broke out into tears when she was given his child over her lap. She never wept nor died as was expected. The first stanza sets a melancholy tone to the poem. Tennyson probably wants to express that it is very much hard for the wife to get over the sudden death of her husband. Grief seems to be a dominant theme as the setting is the house where death has occurred and mourners come and grieve the death. She nor swooned nor uttered cry. This line reveals the shocking grief which she had been pounded ever since she saw her husband being brought home lifeless. In the second stanza, the soldier is praised by the mourners. This appears to be a deliberate attempt by the poet to stir the reader who had been drowned in grief so far. Then they praised him soft and low. The alliteration, truest friend and the noblest foe, tells the reader that the man had been a truest friend and even to his enemies he seemed to have been just and fair. Though the word foe used in the context of praise, it is given a meaning through the word noblest. In the third stanza, a maid's attempt of taking off the face cloth covering the dead soldier is observed to have gone in vain from the line, yet she neither moved nor wept. The poet reiterates shock and possibly unsurmountable grief that has taken control of her ever since she saw his mortal remains being brought home. In the fourth and the final stanza, a very aged and an experienced nurse's wise act of putting her child on her lap brings forth sudden tears. Tennyson compares the warrior's widow's tears to a summer tempest to showcase the suddenness and the impact of her emotions. In effect, a summer tempest is a short burst of rain which occurs quite unexpectedly. These rains are marked by their force and suddenness. Therefore, by comparing the widow's tears to a summer tempest, the poet is telling us how all her emotions came flooding out as once upon seeing his child on her lap. In fact, the beauty of the entire poem is appreciated through these two lines. By equating her tears to the summer tempest, the poet tells us the grief that has been long suppressed only waits to pour out suddenly. Tennyson recounts the value of a mother when the woman says, "Sweet my child, I live for thee," even as she feels distraught and hopeless in the face of her husband's death. She wants to make her life meaningful for her child, a typical motherly attitude. Tennyson also refers to the emptiness of life when one loses the most valued person or possession. and the determination to continue with the life for the well-being of those who need us through this line. The young widow feels that there is nothing left for her but her child, for whose sake she says she will live. The poem is a poignant account of what befalls the young woman with an infant child when her husband has had an untimely and unexpected death. And it conveys a strong message that grief must be expressed or it will do terrible damage. Tears must be shed to provide closure so that life can go on without the person you lost. This is evidenced by the wife's realization in stanza 4 of the fact that she must continue on, her child depends on her. For the first few stanzas, the widow is seen only as a woman who has lost her husband. However, the last stanza reveals that she is not only a widow but also a mother. This insight sheds light onto her reaction, allowing the readers to understand what had been going through her mind as she realized that her husband was dead and she would have to raise the child alone. Another theme of the poem is the theme of praise. First, the dead warrior is praised to be noble and brave, but then praise was given to the wife who first never cried her dead warrior, and then she saw the warrior in the child whom she will live for. She is totally loyal. Another technique which Tennyson has used in the poem is dramatic monologue. Dramatic monologue is a technique widely used by the Victorians. Here it is used as a refrain after stanza 1, intensifying the psychology of the poem. And the poem ends with the words of the widow announcing her devotion to the child's life. Hope you have enjoyed the poem and understood the need of accepting the reality that we face in our lives. Tennyson is recognized as a gifted poet who delved into eternal human questions and who offered both solace and inspiration to his audience. Hope this poem would make you handle the life situations very easily.
You just listened to a literary talk on Home They Brought Her Warrior Dead, a poem of Alfred Tennyson by Professor Vidya in a weekly program of English. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Program in English, and this broadcast came to you from the Chennai station of All India Radio.